Hi everyone, I'm Alex from Games Radar, and I'm joined by our editor-in-chief Sam,
Hello.
our managing editor Rachel,
Hello.
and our guides editor Leon.
Hello.
And today we're basically going weapons free and talking all about The Last of Us 2 and its story. So suffice to say, if you haven't played the game or particularly beaten the game, please pause this video now, go away, beat the game, and then come back because nothing is off limits right now. We're going to go into all of the details. If you're still with us, perfect. I can imagine we could talk about this game for hours because there's just so many little details in every scene. But I kind of want to stick to the biggest plot points and surprises and see what you guys made of them. So starting with the very first, of course, which is, spoiler, Joel's death at the hands of Abby, which takes place about 3 hours in. It's really not very long into the campaign. Now, I'm pretty sure most people predicted Joel would die as soon as The Last of Us Part 2 got announced, just because it felt like Naughty Dog were going to focus on Ellie for this story. But I don't think any of us were quite prepared for the brutality of the murder, which was very much death by golf club. Now, Sam, I know you had that moment sort of spoiled for you by the early leaks, but I'm wondering if that made it any less impactful for you when you actually played it for yourself.
I think the fact I knew it was coming felt like I was constantly waiting for it as the game started, especially as you start playing as Ellie and then you're playing as Abby, and you can feel the coming togetherness of their two stories. Felt like, oh god, it's going to happen really soon, and I could feel myself getting like more goose pimply with every moment of the game. But yeah, I don't think I was prepared for how brutal it was going to be and how yeah, it impacted me. I had to have a moment and turn the game off for a bit and come away because I found it incredibly emotional. And even though I knew it was coming, I didn't think that Ellie would be there to watch it. And actually, the spoilers suggested that Ellie had killed him, not Abby. So it was interesting to see how the spoilers had got it wrong, even though it was like the very sort of opening moment of the game. But yeah, I don't think anyone would have been prepared for quite how horrible it was. Seeing him lying there like a facial mush of like blood and gore.
That was the same for me. That was like the one spoiler I hadn't managed to avoid. But it didn't affect that moment at all for me. I remember when they very, very first announced The Last of Us 2 and the trailers were so focused on Ellie. I mean, we'd all been speculating from day one that like Joel was a ghost in this one, or Joel was, So I don't think it ruined anything because it was sort of something we'd been expecting Joel to be kind of not as big a part of the story. But yeah, it was just the absolute brutality of it. I mean, like, what a way to go. Like, just real, like, it didn't spare you any of the kind of the sounds or the sight of someone's head being essentially turned into pate. It was, it was just, and it was funny because the trauma of that, I feel like, stays with you through the whole game because, you continue to see like kind of the conflict between Ellie and Joel played out in flashbacks, and obviously kind of going back to the ending of the first game, we kind of get to see them struggling with the truth of that. So that like the trauma of it, because every time you go to one of those flashbacks, you're seeing it knowing full well that he's gone and there's no time to kind of mend a lot of this stuff, and yeah, it's just heartbreaking.
I think the brutality of it, like, was sort of almost necessary. The Joel dying was the one spoiler I sort of didn't escape, but as you say, everyone said he was a ghost pretty much from the moment they showed anything. So you knew it was kind of coming. The shotgun blast got me because for some reason I was still kind of like holding on that maybe he's going to be okay. And then as soon as they blew his leg off, I was like, this isn't going to end well. But I think they had to make it as horrible as possible, because if it had been like, I don't know, like a stabbing or a gunshot wound or anything else, it could have, there's like a distance to it, and there's a sort of a layer of removal, and it could have been almost heroic, or it could have just been like, oh, that's how heroes die in games and TV and stuff. So they almost had to like chew it over like bone by bone, like knuckle by knuckle. It was like they really had to make it as bad as it was.
It was very personal.
Yeah, carry on.
No, I was gonna say it was a very personal, like, revengeful way to kill him, which made the rest of the story make so much more sense, because Ellie's trying to almost top what Abby did to Joel in terms of like the brutality of it in a way, and it doesn't make her violence any less freaking awful throughout the whole game, but it's sort of like, well, we started off at the bar being this high, so.
And you don't.
You kind of when it first happens, early on, and you don't really know anything about Abby or the WLF or anything. You don't know her backstory, so you're kind of you don't understand why these strangers are so intent on and doing it, on getting to Joel and Ellie and being so like, slaughtering them in like the worst way. So you just have no sort of context for it. So it's so shocking. But then the longer that the game goes on, you kind of understand the feelings behind it, and you compare it to kind of Ellie's behavior, and it slowly starts to make more sense, which is really clever, like giving the context to that violence and making it not understandable, but fit in that world, and part of the language of the game was really smart, I think
as well, like Abby is justifying it as in like Joel killed the human race, but she still kind of takes it very personally, I think, which is interesting. There's that kind of veil of sort of like there's a much deeper reason for this, but she still she takes her time. She makes it very personal. She gets the golf club. She makes a point of like, I am going to enjoy this, which is almost, I think she's using to some extent he killed the human race as an excuse to kind of bring everyone together for her own personal vendetta. I think it's still very personal for her, despite Joel having this justifiable extra level of badness to what he's done.
Which is interesting. That's a flip side to kind of Joel's behavior in the first game, right? Of he's justifying the kind of, I can't let them eat because who would kill a child? That's morally wrong. But the truth of it is he can't lose another daughter. He can't bear that personal loss. And it's kind of the flip side to Ellie. He's got to be punished for kind of removing all hope from the world. But actually, also, you killed my daddy.
Yeah, that whole sequence where you play as Abby in the first few hours is like full of such great moments. There's a bit where Tommy says Joel's name, I think, and then she just does this little side look, and you're like, oh no, this can't be good. And then even after Joel basically saves her life, there's that whole sequence which feels like something out of a Scorsese movie, because it's all in one shot and it circles around, and then suddenly the shotgun goes to the leg. It's so well crafted, and the genius of it is the way it's structured. I think it just really builds that sort of layer upon layer of tension. How do we feel about like Abby in general as, and this is the next big reveal, I guess, as the sort of playable protagonist for the second half of the game? I mean, she's pretty much playable for 50% of the game, as much as Ellie is.
I think she's I think she's necessary though for obviously she's a fantastic character, but I've seen a lot of people kind of questioning the idea of like making a game about looking into like is the cycle of violence and how bad violence is, and the way we're going to explore it is by making you do lots of violence. And Abby's whole arc is not Ellie's revenge thing. She's basically kind of Joel this time around. She's sort of just trying to stay alive, protect people. She's not kind of bringing it on herself. So I think they almost structurally needed something in the game that isn't going to be Ellie murdering people for 30 hours constantly, because people like Ellie and they don't want Ellie to be like that, which is something we'll get to.
Did you still like Ellie?
No.
As the more time you spent with Abby, because I didn't. The more time I spent with Abby, the less I liked Ellie.
But this is the problem: is they needed someone who was going to be doing all the killing that wasn't just doing it for a singular like revenge reason. And you look at what happens to Abby; she's helping Yara and Lev, and she's just basically doing what Joel did in the first game, which is just trying to get to the next day almost. But then she turns out to be an amazing character.
Well, I thought the mirror worked really well as just kind of showing the total futility of like violence kind of for revenge's sake, because they're essentially both on the same path but at different stages of it, and both of them, in some ways, Abby almost becomes like the healthier option, because she finds she finds Lev, she finds something to care about that isn't just the revenge, where Ellie also gets that chance. She gets she gets little Spud, but that's not enough to stop her. Whereas I think with Abby, you know, finding Lev, that then became her priority and keeping Lev safe. And whereas with Ellie, that wasn't enough for Ellie. Like the need for revenge, even if in the end, ultimately, she, you know, she can't go through with it. Still, she, you know, she left a lot behind for what, you know.
Well, I think there's a lot of complicated things going on as well, because obviously she's got that whole, like, I don't know what my place in the world is, now I know I'm literally the only living saviour of humanity, but nothing can be done about it because this guy killed the one person that could do it and also ruined everything. So she's stuck in this weird place of not being able to resolve herself because the person she hasn't worked it out with is gone. So there's just nothing there to sort of coalesce around and like try and find any kind of peace, because the thing she needs to do that has gone.
It's interesting because she says, like, you could have made my life matter to Joel in that flashback, and actually what she's made her life matter about is finding vengeance for Joel and finding vengeance for the fact that she lost that opportunity. Yes, as much as about trying to find the solution for how she got that opportunity taken away from her as a child, but also has also had Joel taken away from her. So all of her drivers and ambitions become completely self-motivated, and then, you know, you want to root for Abby at the beginning. Well, you don't want to root for Abby at the beginning because you're like, but he killed Joel. You know, who is this person, this strange entity that's come into my game, annoying everything and ruining all the stories? And then you're like, oh shit, no, actually she's just a mirror of Ellie trying to survive, a young girl who's grown up in this post-apocalyptic world, but is trying to do her best, is trying to build a society and protect people. Whereas the more you learn about her, the more you realize that Ellie is so obsessed with her own life that she's never going to go beyond that, and she ends up with absolutely nothing because of it.
I thought it was fascinating, even that scene with, you know, I think early on they're at pains to be like, you know, in another world, in another time, these two girls are quite similar. You know, they're both strong, they both got like a dry sense of humour, they're both kind of fascinated with the similar things. So like, you know, you see it's a really lovely echo of the giraffe scene in the first game when Abby and her father are trying to help the zebra. It's just such a lovely kind of reminder of a very pure kind of human emotion, this kind of wonder at the natural world. And it's just, you know, scenes like that just really help you kind of fall in love with Abby. Or maybe not full, maybe that was just me, but, you know, really warm to Abby very, very quickly. I mean, I love Abby for a lot of reasons, you know, on a very kind of top level. I love, she's such a strong female character in a very real sense of the word. Like, her physicality matches what she's able to do in games. So often in games, the female hero has kind of figure that she's doing lots of strong things, but with the body of like an underfed Russian supermodel. Like, you know, whereas Abby looks like a tank. Abby looks like she is strong enough to do the things she is doing, and that is a body that has been, you know, shaped by the military and her life. And just seeing that on you know, in the game was satisfying and made her feel like a real character, you know.
There's a bit where oh, sorry, Leon.
No. I do feel like Naughty Dog have got slightly limited repertoire, though, when it comes to expressing a strong woman physically, because they've done it with Nadine in Uncharted 4, and then they've done it with Abby, and it's like somebody somewhere is like, the only way we can show a powerful woman is to physically make her look powerful. I don't know if they can kind of get away with that again. I wonder if they got like another way of showing that kind of strength without it being physical.
Well,
I think it's interesting that
you've got that with Ellie. I think, you know, she's the kind of more wiry, tough, you know, she's not bulky. She is very kind of slender and scarred and kind of, but I know what you mean. It's like we now have two body shapes. There's probably
I thought it was interesting though when Dina's like tending her wounds and you get that shot of her back, and it's, you know, it is like it's wiry and like covered in scars and bruises. Like, that's a really good sort of metaphor I think, like a visual metaphor. And I feel like they're mirroring a shot from a movie, and I can't think what it is, where you see, I don't know, like a character like Batman or something, pulling off his shirt and there's all the stuff underneath. But that was, I think, a good way of showing her, like, what she's like inside on the outside, if that makes sense.
I think it's quite interesting that you end up with, Abby starts off as this like muscular tank of a woman who is, utterly focused on getting revenge on Joel, and by the end she's softened. She looks very different by the end of the game. She's become more motherly, more maternal. And even physically, she looks completely different at the end of the game.
At the very end of the game, she's something else entirely.
Yeah, she's almost skeletal, almost, very gaunt. And she's wearing her pain, and the same goes for Ellie. By the end of the game, she's sunburnt, she's scraggly, she's starving, and like they're both very focused on their goal: Abby to protect Lev, and Ellie to get Abby. And because of that, they're both physically changed by that, and I think that's a really interesting evolution.
Well, Abby becomes a person Ellie couldn't, because obviously she, through the story, suddenly decides that this is going to destroy me. I've got Lev. We can do something else with our lives. This doesn't have to be all it is. And Ellie obviously can't do that. She's just like, I must get revenge no matter what. So Abby is kind of basically the better person, because she reaches that point and goes, wait, this is bad, this is stupid, I should do something else. And like, I think
part of that is you see, and it's such a deep story. We've done such amazing things with the characterization, but you kind of, when you look back at the end of the game, you kind of see that the thing that Abby has over Ellie that is maybe why she is slightly more well adjusted, at least in the world of Tears. If you think about like the teen years we saw for Ellie, right? She was on the run, her and Joel, trying to get to the, facing all that going on, the game that we played with them, kind of, fighting through the world. Getting to the hospital, then you assume having to go on the run for a bit, and then sort of meeting up with Jacksonville. But that's like a very traumatic, the game we played, Last of Us 1, is a very traumatic story. And Abby, while there was trauma, she lost her father. You feel like the Fireflies and then the WLF, she at least had a more, normal is not the right word, but she was more part of a community for longer during her teenage years than anyone. She always had Owen. You can see it in the way that she, is concerned about her friend's father. She asks questions about that. The way she has the dogs around, the way when you're walking through when the first time you're in the WLF encampment, and she's just, everyone's like, oh, hi, Abby, and she's having little conversations with everyone. You get a sense of there's much more, she's had much more time in a community and with at least some kind of family structure. Whereas, you look back and think Jacksonville looks lovely when we first see Ellie, but it's taken a hell of a lot, she's been through a lot to get there. She's essentially like, a child refugee from a war-torn country in terms of like the level of trauma that she's had to face to get there. But I think
I get the impression that Abby like channeled her grief into sort of training in the WLF, and there's that cutscene or that flashback where she's with Owen in the marina, and she's like, we've got to get back to training, like I really want to train, I want to go to the gym, blah blah blah. And there's that bit where you first play as her as well, where she literally pulls like a pipe out of a wall, and you're like, oh my goodness, this woman is so strong. Whereas
Alex getting all flustered there.
I was like, yeah, like Ellie would never be able to do that. And then I think it translates to gameplay as well so well. Like the combat just feels completely different when you're playing as Abby. Like she can wipe people out with a single punch. Like she doesn't use a knife to stab people to death. She literally strangles them with her bare arms. It's incredible. But yeah, like the use of, it's interesting that you touched on the flashbacks, because one of my tiny little sort of gripes with the game is that I think it relies on them a little bit too much, and sometimes it's a little bit obsessed with sort of tying up the story threads, particularly when it comes to the last game and like the secret that Joel kept. How did you guys feel about, the fact that we find out that Ellie did find out that Joel did what he did on that night at the hospital, and as a result she sort of basically cut him out of her life for a while before, just as she's about to forgive him, Abby murders her surrogate father.
I think it was. I agree with you that it kind of felt maybe a little bit neat, like, I just found this audio recording that explains everything. But I think it was something the game had to deal with. It was the old gun in the drawer. It was we knew this huge thing from the first game. A lot of what drives the action, on Abby's part in the second game is that fact. And I think this was the only way, like, Ellie had to know, and Ellie had to know before all this happened, because, I mean, you could have done it, Ellie screaming, Abby screaming at her in the middle of, combat, like, but Ellie had to kind of, for it to have the impact, Ellie had to find out by herself, for herself, in a way that, couldn't just be explained away as, like, WF lies or anything. And we had to see the impact of it on her relationship with Joel. And I find it very difficult to think how else they could have done it.
It's interesting because they start off the entire game with that secret. It's Joel's only just filled in Tommy about what happened, like what really happened, as they're sort of out on one of their patrols. So it's interesting that they start off with that reminder, like, don't forget the secret is still out there, and like that's before we even know that Ellie knows. So it's like the game really wanted you to, like, this is going to be pivotal to that story. Don't forget what happened in that first game, almost like a, previously in The Last of Us, but it's like.
I think they're almost overly obsessed sometimes with, like, loose ends and second guessing things people might pick at, because there's stuff like, you do that whole mission with Tommy as sniping the infected across the mountain, just to make it clear later on that he's a very good sniper. When Abby is talking to Manny right at the beginning, they talk about how he's sleeping with a weather girl, which is how they know about the storm for when they invade the island. There's lots of little things they put out there, almost as if they're, like, ready for people in the comments to go, oh, I think you'll find it. Actually, and they've, like, almost made whole levels to knock that stuff on the head.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's probably the way, in my limited experience of going to see sort of game studios when they're working on a story. It's because, they don't write, the story when you look at the final thing isn't like linear thing. It's like they kind of build the world and then decide which bits of the story you get to see.
The flashback I did love was the one where you go back to Ellie being a little girl and the surprise birthday gift.
Yeah, I can't. Oh my god!
That's the giraffe moment, right?
I spent the whole game going, "Where's the giraffe bit? Where's the giraffe bit?" They cannot. How are they going to beat the giraffe bit? And then that happened, and I was like, properly like.
I'm thinking about it now.
Yeah,
not even on.
And it's that sort of what I love about this game is that for every traumatic moment that you go through with this pair of characters, this pair of women, is that the game gives you space to process everything that happens. You go from, like, still reeling over Joel's death and Ellie, I can't remember where it comes in the story now, but, like, she's in Seattle, and then you go back to this really blissful moment where you get to see that banter that Ellie and Joel had, like the fact he pushes her in the water and they have a joke about it. He pretends to be angry when she pushes him in, like the nice dinosaur bits, and then that fantastic bit with the space helmet, and she pretends she's going into space with this beautiful audio moment, and it's like that is what Naughty Dog is so good at, like telling those really small human stories that they're the sort of things that in real life you tell your grandchildren about, decades later. But
again,
they still find time to make those moments, which is really nice.
I know they feel almost like, I feel as well, Naughty Dog is so good at making those moments that when I, for a little while after I'd played Last of Us 2, like when I was recalling stuff to write about it, it was almost like I was recalling like actual memories rather than bits of a story I had, the feelings attached to them. Whereas if I was recalling like something from my own past, because I was so kind of just so locked into that story and just couldn't shake it.
But you see again, like the obsession to detail, where they basically had set you up to feel like that, because there's things like there's a book about space in Joel's house by the side of the bed, like showing he's still reading. He's reading up on that so he can talk to Ellie about it. Ellie is sort of, she mentions about the Apollo capsule that catches fire when you find the tank, because the tank's been burnt out, and she's constantly seeding these things about space. And I remember at the time thinking, this is weird, she never talked about space in the last game. And then you get to the museum and you're like, oh, I understand now. And they're obviously like throwing in these little moments to make kind of you care about space in relation to her, so that when that all happens, it has like an impact. It's all a bit sort of Darren Brown, like kind of seeding it in your brain without you realizing.
It's interesting because you're sort of filling in the gaps of Ellie's life that you didn't get to experience as well. It's just like, we need to like comics, and now that has turned into like an obsession with space, which is really nice. And
the movies that her and Joel love, that series. And
the same goes for Joel as well. Like, you see just this completely different side to the man, like a side that he probably was in the normal pre-collapse days with Sarah. Like,
I think
Baker's voice sounds different. Like, he sounds more like Troy Baker than Joel, which is really sort of odd at first, but then you realise it's because like he's actually happy for once.
I think the thing that says volumes about who Joel is in that game, because you don't really see a great deal of him apart from the big plot beats, but is when Ellie goes to his house, the amount of flowers and tributes outside. Like, his house is covered in little flowers and presents and cards, and you realise that the whole community is missing him. And it's such a weird little moment that you might not even miss, because you just run in the house, get your stuff and go. But like, that, I think, says more than almost anything else in the game about who he is at the point of his death.
Oh God, I lingered at opening that door for so long. I was just like, it was more emotional almost going into his house. Like, I remember Leon was watching me play it at the time, and it was like we both just stood there like, oh God, he's really gone.
Yeah, and then you go in and there's a bit where you like find his coffee cup. And you're like, why is it making me like pick up this and hold this? I don't understand. And then like right at the end of the game, it comes back and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, he loves coffee. Like, Ellie's got him coffee. It all comes back full circle.
But it's the thing is literally when the last time you see him, he's holding that cup. Yeah. Which is why like it means nothing at the beginning, and then at the end you're like, that's why she held the cup, because that is literally the last contact you have with him.
Yeah. Speaking of the ending, let's get onto that, because there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start at what I think Leon thought was the actual ending, which is the boss fight between Ellie and Abby. Not
so much the boss fight, but what I think is interesting, saying about like how we didn't like Ellie by the end of it, and you're rooting for Abby, and people talking about the sort of the conflict of making a game that's trying to be about violence being bad, that's full of violence. The point at which, after Abby has effectively defeated Ellie and left her, and she goes home, you have the bit with JJ Potato, you bring the lambs in, you see her with PTSD, Tommy comes around and says, I found her again, and she's like, no, I can't. And then she goes upstairs and sort of plays a couple of notes on the guitar, and then it just fades to black. That, to me, is like the perfect ending, because she's broken, she's been ruined by what she's done, but she's obviously considering another way kind of thing. She said no to Tommy, even though he's been a prick about it. But at that point, you can see she needs Dina just basically to get her through every single moment of the day. She loses it when the barn door shuts, and it's just that the look in her eyes when she stops playing guitar and it fades to black is the same look she has when Joel tells her that there was no cure at the end of the first game. It's the same kind of like, I don't know what to do kind of look that ended the last game. And at that point, it would have been like, my hands were shaking, and it's like, that would have been perfect, because there's loads of questions, it's unresolved, there's this sort of tumultuous kind of mess of things that you have to process, which puts you in her position. But then you go on a 3-hour jaunt, which is actually a longer journey than the rest of the entire game up until that point, and go and find Abby and end it on Ellie's terms, which suddenly just undoes all of the good work. Because that whole fight with you and Ellie in the water, you and Abby in the water, which is incredible, like stylistically and visually and whatever. The whole time you're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be this Ellie, but the game won't let you do anything else. So you have to basically end the game souring your relationship with Ellie in this weird little addendum, because Wyoming to, this is the boring bit, but Wyoming to Seattle is 800 miles, so 1,600 mile round trip. That was the whole game. Then Jackson, Wyoming to Santa Barbara is 1,100 miles, so 2,200 miles. So that 3 hours at the end is almost like 50% bigger than the whole game was.
But that's it. I think I was not mad about there being more game, just because I wasn't ready for it to be over. And I think to end it in that kind of ambiguous way would be to let us off the hook and let us think, oh, well, maybe like she's just going to live happily ever after, and maybe like it's all fine and there's a nice field and everything. I liked that they were like, no, we're going to keep pushing this. We're going to show you, you know, that this is really like, she is fully broken, and it's not a neat and tidy ending. It is, you know, that there are other people in the world, you know, the world, I think it gave you a sense as well that the world is bigger. So you get the sense that, you know, maybe there are the Fireflies in Catalina. You get a sense that there are other groups, there are other factions beyond this kind of small bit of it we've seen with Ellie and Abby. You know, it's not just about, you know, the Jacksonville camp, the WLF, the Fireflies from the first game. There are other groups out there with like their own unsavory missions. And it's devastating and it's uncomfortable, and that the whole bit of that game from very, you know, even just watching Ellie move is uncomfortable because she looks so broken. And then when you find Abby and Lev, it's just devastating to see the physical toll of what they've been through has done to them. So I think it would have been neater if it finished where it did, but I also think it would have. This is not a story with a happy ending, and they can't let you think that maybe it is.
Well, the thing is, I don't think it is a happy ending. She's obviously, you know, she's PTSD coming out the eyeballs. She's an absolute wreck. The thing that bugs me more than anything, the more and more I think about it, is by the end of the game, she's travelled nearly 4,000 miles. Why at that point did she suddenly oh, hang on, yeah, I'll have this flashback and now I'll reconsider my life choices after, you know, 4,000 miles of travel? Why at that point does she suddenly have the maybe I could be good instead kind of revelation?
I think she sees Abby and what they've been reduced to. Like, these are two broken women having a fight in the sea about one death in the sea of thousands, and you know, there's Lev in the boat waiting, and
yeah,
like maybe there's a mirror between Lev and Abby, Lev and Ellie. You know, like
there is, I think absolutely. I think Lev unconscious, waiting in a hall to be, you know, hopefully saved, is such a mirror to the ending of the first game of, you know, Abby waking up in the back of that car.
Ellie.
Oh, I'm getting goosebumpy again. It's that kind of, I think, whether Abby knows it or not, something about that kind of, you know, in another world, The Last of Us 1 is the story of Abby and Lev, who are being hunted by this kind of mad person that caused, you know, the end of the world. You know, in another story, it's Abby and Lev's story, and they're the relationship that, you know, we're obsessed with.
But again,
interesting. It could have ended with Abby and Ellie fighting in the theatre. I thought that could have been an interesting ending, in that like Abby lets her go and you leave with that feeling that she is the bigger person. She's the one who's grown the most throughout this process. But I really loved the way it ended. It left things open enough that you could tell Abby and Lev's story next, and where they go, and what is that carousel that's sort of lingering in the title screen now. It's left enough open, but you're sort of like, I'm so done with Ellie now. Like, we've seen her story, like she's ruined her life trying to get revenge for someone who she didn't really understand, and, you know, had a very complicated relationship with, and suddenly you're left with the tiny bit of hope that maybe Abby and Lev can go on to something better.
It's kind of interesting that they've taken like one of like PlayStation's most beloved characters and made you not like her anymore. Like, I imagine, I can't see anyone like worshipping and idolizing Ellie the same way at the end of this game that they have done up until now.
I think it's basically the same relationship we had with Joel in the first game. Like, we like her. She's a very likable person on a very human level, but she's done some terrible, terrible things. And I think it's worth.
By the end, like, you feel like you see those flashbacks to her as like the cute little kid, and I feel like by the end there's.
I don't know. I think there's moments.
There aren't the jokes. There aren't so much of that is gone from her. All that is left is.
And she's repeatedly shown this.
She
Did you not like the
abandons
sheep
her.
bit?
Yeah.
Where she names the sheep after with different puns. That's a good joke.
But she gives all that up, and I think by the end of the game, there is so little of that left. You know, there is.
She comes across almost like an addict. Like, there's a destructive intent to her where she's almost like addicted to revenge, and she keeps like sort of almost like she swears she's clean, and then you find her like in the bathroom with another bottle of revenge, going, "Don't look at me," sort of thing. Like, she just can't give it up, and it's destroying her, and she's almost willfully doing it for another hit.
Yeah. I think there is something in there. I think there is, they talk about, the cycle of trauma, and in a way, like, Ellie has perpetuated that cycle on Dina and Spud. It's little JJ. She's now ruined. She's not, by leaving them, she's not just ruining her own life. She is now passing that on to her own child.
Actually, there's a really important question we need to answer here. Is it Jesse Joel or Joel Jesse?
Oh, I didn't even think.
I'm going to say Jesse Joel because Jesse's the dad.
Joel, yeah, I think Jesse Joel.
Yeah.
Spud. His name is Spud, not JJ.
Yeah.
I also think the house is a very interesting metaphor for her own life. Like, when you first get to that house in the country, it's all sort of glowing sunsets and golden wheat, and everything seems very like, paradise, and there's a glimmer of hope there. But when she comes back to that house, the wallpaper's torn down. It's grey. The paint on the outside of the house is sort of chipped away, and you're just like, that's what you could have had. And I think you have to go through that process with her and see what she could have had, like, completely empty. And that's an absolute metaphor for her life and how much she's got left. It's just one room full of some stuff and some memories. There's no future there. I
think the fingers as well are like a really interesting metaphor, because she loses the fingers and then
they're so wibbly.
But she can't. But she now can't play the guitar anymore, and it was sort of the one thing she shared with Joel. It was the one connection that she has in herself that would bring her close to him, and now her own destructive kind of behaviour has destroyed that one thing she had.
To wrap up, do we want to see Abby and Lev DLC or a new like part 3? Is that where we want to go? Because it pretty much looks like that from what we can say.
The DLC Abby and Lev, and me and Alex have talked about this, is they get to Catalina, they meet up with some fireflies who help look after them, but then Abby and Lev go and start a zebra sanctuary and just live out their days.
There's lots of them on Catalina Island.
Live out their days with, like, Abby showing Lev all the stuff all the New World stuff she missed, so like movies and music and video games, and they just look after their zebra sanctuary and live happily ever after. That's the DLC.
I would also play a Stardew Valley-like life sim set in the barracks of the WLF with, like, the sheep and the dogs and stuff, because, like, it was very zen, it was very peaceful. I spent way too much time playing fetch with that dog. But yeah, like, absolutely, I want to see where Abby and Lev go, and how Abby grows as a mother and embracing that side of herself. And, like, I will never forget Abby finding the letters that Abby's been writing to Owen after he's died, and, like, maybe she can find love again, maybe she can find a happiness and a family, and Lev is her people, as she says, which almost broke me in that fight. And I want to see where that goes.
What if the DLC is her getting to Catalina, and then as she's meeting up with the Fireflies, some old guy walks over and goes, "Oh yeah, I work with your father, I can totally make a cure if only we knew who that girl was."
Yeah. I've texted Leon about this before, but I would quite like to see what happened when Ellie went to Las Vegas. I'm imagining like a sort of surprisingly upbeat, just rollick through the casinos. But I don't know. It might happen. It might not. That's a good place to end it, right?
Weird stripper clickers. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
I tell you what, something we haven't thought of. Maybe they could do a really good story of what Dina got up to while they were away. Like, who knows what happened in Jackson while Ellie was off wandering.
Yeah, there's so many characters. Well, this has been great to get it all out in the open. Like,
no, I feel like the weight off my chest. Such a small group of people to talk to about this, even in my own home.
Thanks, guys, for sharing, and thanks everyone else for watching. I hope we didn't spoil it for you, but if we did, that's your own fault. But yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.